Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We got a special guest on the line right now. She is the president of Planned Parenthood, Alexis McGill Johnson. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Now, Alexis, I'm so glad you're here because I hear a lot of things about Planned Parenthood. And previously, we've had Cecilia Richards on the show about her book, Make Trouble. And now you are the CEO of Planned Parenthood. So can we talk about Planned Parenthood and the services they provide? Because I think people equate Planned Parenthood all the time to just abortions.
Right, absolutely, they do, and we provide, a full spectrum of sexual and reproductive health care. We provide birth control, family planning, STI testing, breast cancer screenings, and of course we also do provide abortion. I think that's part of abortion is healthcare, and it's part of the spectrum of sexual and reproductive health care. But, it is certainly something that people think we do the majority of. And the reality is the majority of what we do is provide that bigger spectrum. We're the most trusted provider out there around sex ed and everything else you can imagine.
The biggest thing that bothers me is when they protest outside, and there are a lot of people that want to go in for services or want to go in to get checked out, and it really scares the hell out of them. I see it all the time in Jersey, and they protest. There's nothing you guys can do to get them to get away, because I feel bad for people that have to go inside, and people are protesting, they're yelling and screaming at people, so there's nothing that Planned Parenthood can do with that.
Yeah, because imagine as a woman, you've made the difficult decision, because it's not an easy decision, to have an abortion, and then you have people protesting your own reproductive rights. So you can imagine that could be something that feels threatening also, because sometimes it does get physical.
Yeah, that's right. Look, it's a tactic. It's a tactic to shame the patient. It's a tactic to shame the provider. It's a tactic to say you don't know how to make the best decision for yourself and for your own body. And so, no, there's nothing we can do, because the right to protest is part of, our Constitution and free speech. But getting access to abortion is also part of a constitutional right that we have, that we're defending fiercely. Mm-hmm. And so, we do what we can to protect our patients and make sure that they get the best affirming care when they get inside.
Alexis, how glued to the TV were you yesterday during the Supreme Court discussing whether or not to get rid of Obamacare?
Oh, like nonstop. I feel like I've been glued to the TV for, the last 4 years now, unhealthily. But yeah, yesterday was really critically important. Obamacare was on the line, and we know we're in the middle of a pandemic. We know that we are in the middle of a pandemic that's disproportionately affecting Black and brown communities, low income communities, and to cut off access to Obamacare, to the ACA would eliminate, healthcare for almost 20 million people. And we also know it would impact, whether or not we could use pre-existing conditions if insurers would cover us, whether or not birth control would be covered, whether or not there'd be gender discrimination, like all of the incredible things that went into that fight for Obamacare were on the line. But I do feel, slightly hopeful. I can't read the tea leaves, but I do feel slightly hopeful that at least even the conservative Supreme Court justices were not trying to undermine that.
Yeah, they said this morning that they think they're going to leave it in place, but you never know with these people.
Mm-hmm.
You never know. Exactly. I'm still waiting for the shoe to drop.
Now, on social media, I always see this narrative, and I hear people say it too, right? That that abortion is murdering Black babies, that more Black babies are murdered than killed in the United States every year. And it's a conspiracy theory. This is how they're controlling the Black population. So I want to hear from you, Alexis, what your thoughts are on that and how you respond to these statements.
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Angela. Every time I hear that, and as a Black woman, the notion, right, that that abortion is genocide to the Black community is just another tactic to shame Black women. And my question is, really, do you trust Black women to make decisions about their own bodies? Do you trust Black women to make decisions about their own, freedom? Every time we repeat that, every time we hear that harmful misinformation, we have to think about what we're really saying, particularly as Black communities propagating that. We're really challenging and questioning whether or not we have the capability to make our own decisions. And that just it infuriates me.
How difficult was the last 4 years with Donald Trump and Pence being in president and vice president? And what are you looking forward to the next 4 years now that we're changing? So how difficult was it? Let's start with there.
I mean, it's been horrible, right? I mean, I think that particularly on issues of reproductive rights, but the intersection of reproductive rights, of race, of, kind of really destroying our democracy, I think has been the real challenge under this administration. They forced us out of, the Title X program, which is the family's largest family planning program. They, have given cover to, any number of abortion bans across the country, limiting access. We've seen just in the last few months of COVID, or at least at the beginning of COVID, the number of executive orders that the administration essentially gave cover to for people to stop people accessing abortion in their state where it is still legal. And what hasn't happened is people seeking the access and the care that they need. And so the burden that has been placed on communities, particularly our communities, having to drive out of state, to get access in some cases just to medication abortion, I think has been unreal. Mm-hmm. What we're looking forward to, though, is, having President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, who
you're Sora.
My son, skewy.
Do it one time. Do it one time.
A little early for skewy.
It's too early.
A little early. But like to have them be so like the world of possibility, the idea of repealing the Hyde Amendment, which is a racist, discriminatory amendment that says that essentially low-income communities cannot have access to abortion because of, restrictions on federal funding and use of Medicaid, to have them think about, just expanding and modernizing programs around family planning. I mean, 99% of women use birth control. Like, this should not be controversial. It shouldn't be complicated. And yet they put so many obstacles in the way to try to stop it. It's ridiculous.
What would you like to see the Biden-Harris administration? Well, I like to say the Harris-Biden administration. What would you like to see the Harris-Biden administration do in the first 100 days? Because I know Planned Parenthood supported that ticket.
Oh, yeah, no, we were there early on supporting. And, I think that the biggest thing, we want to see is executive orders. We know that obviously we still have to wait to see what's going to happen in Georgia and make sure that we can, fight and get everybody out, and so that we have control of the Senate. We also know we have a very hostile court to access sexual reproductive health care. And it's not just the Supreme Court, it's the 200 and something judges that McConnell has pushed through, like, very dangerously, very conservative judges. Couple of judges don't even believe in IVF. Like, that's how extreme it is. Like, it's not abortion is on one side. They don't even believe in IVF. So, making sure that we have the executive orders that allow us to, to boldly declare that sexual and reproductive health care is a core part of their, policy and strategy. We're also going to be looking really closely at their personnel, because we know personnel is policy, and making sure that the people that they are pointing to their agencies have very strong records on sexual and reproductive health care. And, and seeing what we can do to really marshal Congress around what the federal legislation is going to look like to support access to abortion.
Alexis, what made you make the decision to work for Planned Parenthood? I'm just curious, like, why you felt like that was necessary in your calling.
I feel like this is like my third iteration of a career. I had been on the board for about a decade. I started off actually running politics. I ran voter dive for Puff and organizing young people. I left that work to do a lot of work around implicit bias and, working with police departments and healthcare providers and educators. And, in this moment, when I was asked to step in, it just felt like the culmination of a lot of work that I had been doing, understanding that, race for me is still at the center of everything that I do. And knowing that that from, racism is a healthcare crisis, knowing that we need to still make sure that our, girls and boys and theys in between have to be cared for and done so with compassion. It just felt like it was an opportunity to really offer service in a way that with a platform that was incredibly important and powerful and meaningful in our community. So, it wasn't an easy decision. in terms of a lifestyle. I got small children myself, and and a full life, but it was just felt like it was the right time to step in and lead. And the line for leadership is short.
Could you break that down for me, Alexis? You said racism is a healthcare crisis.
Yeah, I mean, look at the pandemic. I mean, we see who was getting on the subways here, every morning from March and April. We see the people who their bodies were literally deemed essential workers. They were the ones who were, I live uptown, jumping on the A train, making sure that they were getting to the health centers, opening them up, making sure that they were the ones who were cleaning up afterwards, driving the buses, driving the trains, and they were the ones who were the most vulnerable in terms of their bodies, right? I mean, they had indicators that like diabetes and asthma and things that have been systemically, affected our communities disproportionately. And so, it is, I think racism is a democracy crisis, it's a national security crisis, it's a healthcare crisis, because we haven't really dealt with the ways in which people of color, particularly Black people, have been treated, and the hierarchy of how we invest our resources to support them. And so to sit at the top of a nation's largest sexual and reproductive healthcare provider and think about how fundamental and how foundational that kind of care is for many of us, like it's the first point of entry into the healthcare system. And so to know that, like, if we can build the right house around our communities, it will be prepared to serve, all communities.
Have you ever gotten to the root of why conservatives are so pro-life? Like what is their obsession with telling women what to do with their bodies?
It's interesting because it actually, access to family planning and access to abortion really has been traditionally a bipartisan issue. There have been, it's just in the last kind of couple of decades that we've seen this alignment, and there are a lot of really good, important pieces to do. And again, just to tie it back to race again, there are a lot of really important pieces that have come out. One documentary called Reversing Roe, another good book called The Lie That Binds, around how politically the right was looking for essentially to awaken the evangelical base and wanting to engage them. And a lot of what evangelicals were looking for at that time were to have enforcement around segregationist laws. They wanted to keep Bob Jones University segregated. They didn't want to have to let Black people in. And obviously they knew they couldn't run on segregation, so they ran on abortion, and that energized and innervated, all of these communities. And so, I do think it continues to be at the center, and that control of people's bodies, it becomes a critical part of it. But the majority of Americans don't buy it, right? I think that's the interesting thing. 77% of Americans actually believe that Roe should be the law of the land. There is literally no state, even the states that you think are the most conservative, who don't believe that Roe should be the law of the land. And yet, because of the ways in which these states got gerrymandered over the last decade, we have a small group of people, small minority, vocal minority, who control the levers of power in those states. And that's why we see such uneven access.
One thing I've heard in doing research, right, is when there were restrictions on access to abortion, that women were still having them, it was just a lot more dangerous. So Can you talk about that and what happens when you do restrict people's access to healthcare?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a great point, Angela. Like, what will not happen with all these bans is people will not stop seeking access. And we literally just saw this 6 months ago in March during COVID. People still got in their cars. And if they felt like the access wasn't there because they couldn't afford to do that, they couldn't afford to take time off from work, they couldn't afford to, childcare or whatever else they needed, they were they are more susceptible to going to places, pre-Roe, like, where they would be getting pills they, maybe not FDA approved. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't be getting kind of the broad access to healthcare. There's stories of obviously historically and probably currently of using coat hangers to puncture one's uterus. I mean, like very harmful situations that are horrific and we should just not go back to because people are desperate in this situation. And I think that's is a huge fight for us.
Have you guys ever did you guys shut down at all during the pandemic? Because I know a lot of businesses shut down. Did you guys shut down at all?
Well, thankfully, because we are healthcare, we're healthcare workers, right? So we were also essential workers. We were able to, to keep many of our clinics open and make sure that that people are still having sex during the pandemic. People still needed access to basic things. We were also able to, get telehealth up and running and make sure that we could see virtual visits and get people the kind of access and care that they needed. We also know that's not a long term, that's a really important long-term solution. We're not going to go back, but there are also broadband equity issues. There are also issues with our ability to access that too. So keeping the doors open is really important. But like everybody, because the coronavirus was so mishandled, we had to fight for PPE. We had to fight for, basic, things to provide care.
Gotcha.
Do you how do you feel about Amy Coney Barrett? Her anti-abortion views. What kind of impact do you think that's going to have on abortion access in this country?
Like chills through me. When you say her name. I'm very worried. She's a vocal, threat to abortion. She's said it's always immoral. She's been really clear about her views and her positioning, and I don't, I did not trust, what little she did reveal about her thoughts, if anything at all, during the hearings. I think the real thing that we have to be concerned about is the fact that, the courts, we've always relied on the courts in as a branch to help us as a stopgap with all of these bad bans that have come. And now we have 18 cases that are literally one case away from, the Supreme Court that could, if not overturn Roe, really severely gut it. There's a case out of Georgia that came up in 2019 that was a 6-week ban. And if you think about how, we actually count your pregnancy, right? It starts the first day of your last period. So that's like 4 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, when you find out that you are pregnant, abortion would be illegal in those states.
Because some people don't know they're pregnant at 6 weeks.
That's what I didn't know. I didn't know with my second child. I'm like, and so what that means is that if you live in a state, where that ban is upheld, you have to make a choice, whether or not it's the right time for you to start or expand your family or become a parent. And if you live in another state like New York, if you live in a state like New York, you can actually make that choice. If you live in a state like that, you could actually be forced into pregnancy if you don't have the ability to do that. It's just, it's crazy.
Right. If you don't have access to be able to travel to another state, because some people can't afford to do that.
That's right.
And this is there, then now you're forced against the wall. And then people will say, oh, well, you knew you couldn't afford to have kids, and now we want to take away these benefits. And why are you expanding your family? But then at the same time, they don't want to allow you the choice to decide on your own family.
Yeah. No, they're pro-birth. They don't do anything after. Like they don't want to support any other invest in education system. None of it.
So how strong is Roe versus Wade, though? Because a lot of people say, like, in Black and brown communities, the promise of Roe is already meaningless because abortion is inaccessible. So how strong is it? If it's strong
That's
at
right.
all.
I mean, you're right. Absolutely. And it's always been a floor. Like our reproductive justice partners would say, 100% that Roe is a floor, not the ceiling, because when you don't have access to providers and all of the ways in which, states have, put additional burdens on providers and on, organizations like ours, the kinds of bans that, create more expenses and really target the practice. And it's literally the only medical practice that is so heavily restricted that it really limits access for Black and brown communities. And so, we believe that you should be able to get access healthcare in your zip code. You shouldn't have to travel, obviously, out of state. But even within some states, the limitations on providers has been such that it's been difficult to access.
How hard has it been for y'all to navigate through the Title X gag rule that Trump implemented?
I think what has been really important is that when we made the decision, when we were forced out of that program, a number of states stepped in because they understood how important family planning is, and so they were able to backfill some. We had been planning for it because we obviously knew, crazy of this administration. We I feel like we become professional scenario planners. But it's, thinking about that. So saving resources to dedicate towards that. But it's not fundraising is, charity isn't justice, right? We have to make sure as a critical part of the public healthcare infrastructure that we are using our public dollars in ways that create strong foundations for people and for communities. And so we've been fighting that. It's been a challenge, but it's one of those things that for sure we will be working with the Harris-Biden administration on to restore.
I hope you're working with them on the high maternal mortality rate among Black women as well.
Yes, I do. Absolutely. And, look, I mean, that's just heartbreaking. And to feel like, the opportunity that we have with Vice President-elect Harris, I get so excited saying that, is that she was one of the co-sponsors of the Momnibus bill, right, to address maternal mortality. And so, I think that is going to be a key priority as well. And I think all of the things you do that will connect, reproductive health is connected to so many things. It's connected to the economy. It's connected to, our ability just to thrive. It's, in our communities. And so I know that she'll have a number of priorities, and obviously President-elect Biden will have a number of priorities, but making sure that it isn't a siloed issue. It's not a woman's issue. This is actually something that really is foundational, is really what the work is to make sure.
Well, Alexis, we appreciate you for checking in today, the president of Planned Parenthood. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alexis.
Yes, guys.
We've been trying to get you on for quite some time, but I'm glad we made it happen.
Thank you.